For those of you who are new to our programming, we've given our writers a topic to consider and present to you today. To learn about this year's cohort of writers, visit iwp.uiowa.edu, where you can find biographies and writing samples from our writers and a schedule of our upcoming events. You can also find this information by scanning the QR code on the bookmarks available at the back of the room. And there is also pizza, graciously provided by International Programs. And my thanks, as always, to the staff here at the Iowa City Public Library, which makes this space available to us on Fridays. When we get to the, I'll say this in a second. And now for today's panel. I'm a little discombobulated because I've just come from the Patti Smith Q&A, and remember, she's reading at 5 o'clock this afternoon in Englert, and it's free. And if it's anything like the Q&A we just witnessed, and I think some IWP writers will come drifting in as it comes to an end, it'll be spectacular. Why I write. This year's residency represents writers from 29 countries, various ages, genres, and interests. Regardless of these differences, one thing unites this year's participants: they write. These essays explore the writer's interpretation of the question, why do you write, through the discussion of influences, motives, and goals. Our format for every panel is the same. I'll introduce the writers going down the line. They'll each give a brief presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. Ikram will be wandering around with the microphone. Please don't begin asking your question until he reaches you with that microphone, because we want to be sure that the audience watching on YouTube can hear you as well as those in this room. Please speak slowly and loudly to ensure that the presentation is accessible. Immediately to my left is Sabine Javari, fiction and nonfiction writer, translator from Pakistan, the UK, and the UAE. She's the author of the short story collection Hajibistan and the novel Nobody Killed Her. She's the editor of volumes 1 and 2 of the multilingual Arzu anthology of student writing, as well as the creative nonfiction anthology by Pakistani women writers titled Ways of Being. Her fiction has been published in the London magazine, Litro, Wasafiri, Oxonian Review, and more, while her nonfiction has appeared in the Journal of Commonwealth Literature, South Asian Review, and Three Quarks Daily, among others. She currently teaches writing at the New York University Abu Dhabi branch, and her participation in the fall residency is made possible by a gift from the estate of William B. Corton to the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. Next to Sabine is Chung Young, a fiction writer from South Korea. Her debut short novel, The Language of Adolf and Albert, won the Dong Libo New Writers Contest in 2015. In 2019, she won the Today's Writers Award for her novel Juliana Tokyo. In 2020, she won the Young Writers Award and the Queer Literature Award for her queer romance, Our Wish is a Science Boy. In 2021, she won the Kim Yu Jeong Literature Award and the Buma Democratic Uprising Literary Award for Kyoko and Kyoji. Her participation in the fall residency was made possible by a grant from Arts Council Korea, or ARCO. Next to her is Yutin Sawanashi, the fiction writer, scholar from Japan. He's the author of The Village of Flamingos, 2011, which received the Subaru Literary Prize, Letters of Letters, and Rain and Raven. His story, Filling Up with Sugar, appears in the Penguin Book of Japanese Short Stories, which was edited by Jay Rubin with a preface by Haruki Murakami. He teaches at Ryokoko University and serves as a coordinator of the Kyoto Writers Residency. His participation was made possible by the University of Iowa Center for Asian and Pacific Studies and the Stewart Memorial Fund. Finally, Nada Al-Turki, nonfiction writer, poet, and journalist from Saudi Arabia. She's a reporter for the English-language daily newspaper Arab News and has contributed to several regional and international publications, including Canvas Magazine, Voice of America, and The National. She's also a co-founder of the Gen Inc., a Riyadh-based writing collective dedicated to creating a meaningful space for Saudi writers to connect, and contributed a chapter to the textbook Women Community Leaders and Their Impact as Global Change Makers. She is currently writing a collection of poems inspired by her life in Saudi Arabia and time spent in the U.S., and her participation in the fall residency was made possible by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Please join me in welcoming these writers, and we'll begin with Sabine.
Thank you, and adab. I'll start my talk with a, sorry, excuse me, I have a bit of a sore throat. I'll start my talk with a quote from my own book, Hijabistan. We are all made of stories. We are all made of stories. Some are written for us, some we write ourselves. Some we tell others, and some we tell ourselves. Quotation mark close. But it's the stories that we don't want anyone to know that intrigue me the most. These are the stories that often get writers into trouble. Yet, we writers stubbornly continue to write. Why? What drives us, excites us, motivates us? What is it about the power of storytelling that compels us to write? In his famous essay, Why I Write, George Orwell divides the reasons into 4 parts: the desire for recognition, aesthetic enthusiasm, a historical impulse to record the world as it is, or the political purpose of pushing the world in a certain direction. For Joan Didion, in her essay of the same title, the reasons are simpler. I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking. Sorry, excuse me. I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see, and what it means, what I want and what I fear. Closer to home, the Urdu short story writer Sadat Hasan Manto calls writing a compulsion. Not to feed into the tortured alcoholic writer trope, but Manto, like Hemingway, thought of writing as an addiction. He writes in his essay, also titled Why I Write, I'm addicted to writing, just as I'm addicted to drinking. When I don't write, it feels like I'm unclothed, like I haven't had a bath, like I haven't had my first drink. For me, the reasons I write are deeply rooted in the reasons that often stop me from writing. Sometimes it's the self-imposed guilt of neglecting my family or demands of my day job. Other times it's self-censorship or the imposter syndrome, screaming, "Who are you to write this?" This fear of rejection can be paralyzing. The fear of success and drawing attention to myself, even more daunting. With so many reasons not to write, you may be wondering, why am I sitting at a panel about why I write? I'm here because for every reason that holds me back, there are more that urge me on. My journey as a writer has been shaped by the powerful words of other women of color. Arundhati Roy once said, "There's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard." And I think that goes to those who don't write or don't speak up as well. This resonates deeply with me, especially because I hail from a country governed by successive dictatorial regimes, where freedom of expression was curtailed and censorship rampant. I witnessed how women's rights were brutally compromised by laws like the Hudud Ordinance. The state in Pakistan inserted itself into women's lives, dictating everything from honor-killing pardons to control over women's bodies. Brave writers like Fahmida Riaz spoke up, but were forced into self-exile. Presses were shut down, libraries burned down. In fact, it feels ironic that we're having this conversation in the library, a space I had limited access to as a child. My tiny school did not have a library, and only the privileged had access to private libraries or elite bookshops where English language books were sold. Growing up without books made me keenly aware of how knowledge is a form of privilege. For many women of my generation, writing became the means of reclaiming that knowledge. I remember squeezing into corners of bookstores, speed reading books I couldn't afford to buy under the buy before you try sign, and then recounting the plot to friends, probably my earliest training as a storyteller. And this actually came in very handy later on in my profession as an academic, where I have to read lots of texts. As I grew older, the reasons to write became all the more pressing. I found myself in a foreign country, UK, and writing became a way to make sense of that displacement. In Bad Feminist, Roxane Gay writes, I write to understand as much as to be understood. During my first few years abroad, I often encountered Western narratives that painted Muslim women as oppressed and voiceless. But I knew that wasn't the whole truth. As Shimananda Adichie said in The Dangers of a Single Story, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Yes, I grew up under dictatorship. Yes, I witnessed gender violence and saw cases like Zainab Bibi, a blind woman jailed for adultery after reporting rape because she couldn't produce 4 male witnesses to support her testimony. But I also saw women like my mother and aunts who marched against these laws, women like Asma Jahangir who fought for legal reforms, and poets like Fahmida Riaz and Kishwar Nahid, whose feminist writing itself was an act of political resistance. These stories need to be told too. So I started writing about those liminal spaces between silence and speaking out. It wasn't easy. I am not a natural writer, nor a brave one. I had to remind myself, and I still do, that I come from a line of courageous women writers like Malala Yousafzai, who started advocating for girls' education under the Taliban rule in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. She did this as a young girl through her blog on BBC Urdu website. Or Ismet Chugdai, whose bold story, The Quilt, about queerness and female sexuality, caused such a stir in 1942 that the British Raj had to try her for obscenity. Of course, she won the trial because they found out that the law only applied to sodomy. So. Or further back, Ruqayya Sakhwant Hussain, who in 1905 wrote Sultana's Dream, possibly the first feminist science fiction story in English about a world where men were kept indoors and veiled, due to which all wars ended and global peace was achieved. When I wrote my first novel, I tried to tell the story inspired by Benazir Bhutto, Pakistan and the Muslim world's first female prime minister. Like Samira Makhmalbaf, who's an Iranian filmmaker, her film At 5 in the Afternoon, which portrays a young Afghan woman whose only hope against the Taliban is the election of a female prime minister in a neighboring country, Pakistan. I felt that Benazir's rise and her assassination were crucial to telling a different story about Muslim women. Through subsequent anthologies, I continued to challenge reductive narratives of oppressed Muslim women, telling more nuanced stories that reflected the full spectrum of their resilience and agency. But when my book Hijabistan came out, exploring the metaphorical veil between Muslim women and society, I received a lot of criticism for it. In fact, an elderly colleague at my university where I worked in Pakistan advised, why don't you write about something safe like other Pakistani writers do, like terrorism, for example? And so for some time, I stopped writing. But if writing was hard, not writing was harder. Eventually, as Roxane Gay says, I wrote myself back together. Today, I write not because I want to, but because I must. I think of my mother who used to write poems in secret and publish them under my uncle's name because she feared for her reputation. And he's a famous Urdu writer now, by the way, thanks to her. I think of the many women whose stories became lullabies or folk songs because they could not write them down. I think of women who throw their creativity and imagination into cooking or embroidery or dressmaking, not that there's anything wrong with it, but because those are permissible expressions of women's art in some parts of the world. Finally, I think of those for whom literacy is not a right, but a privilege. And then all self-doubt disappears. Today I write because it is an honor, a responsibility, and a necessary act of survival. I'd like to end with an Urdu verse. Waqt likhata hai aur main likhti hoon. Kya hoon main aur meri marzi kya hai? Time dictates, and I write. Who am I to? And what right do I have? What choice do I have but to write? Thank you.
Hello, I'm a female novelist from South Korea. Why do I write? This is a very difficult question. It is a personal question for me, but a very public question for writer. I think I should start with this story. In 2016, a woman was murdered in public restroom in Seoul. The reason was because she was a woman. Actually, Seoul is a very safe city, but it is often scared for women. Whenever I go to a public restroom, I'm always nervous. I'm worried that there might be hidden cameras. Now, maybe you know what I am going to say. I'm a novelist, but I also study Korean culture, especially women, female workers, sex workers, and sexual minorities. Contemporary Korean culture is definitely connected to Japan and United States. When I say that I write novels about women from those two countries, most people think of novels about sexual slavery in the Japanese and American militaries. Of course, this is a very important part, but I did not want to stop at criticizing specific countries. I want to tell stories about the lives of women and queers who have been erased from history. Actually, since the declaration that the most personal is the most political, feminism is not simply supporting women. I think the positions of queers and women in Korea are very similar. The same goes for other marginalized people. For example, my novel Juliana Tokyo is a story of solidarities between Hanju, a female researcher who lost her native language due to dating violence, and Yukino, a Japanese guy who was abused by his gay lovers. Naturally, this novel talks about the deep-rooted hatred toward minorities in Japan and Korea. Of course, I can strongly say that the Japanese government should apologize immediately, but I didn't stop there. I want to tell the stories of minorities people, Korea and Japan. The funny thing is, however, when this novel was selected as a recommended book by National Library of Korea, some Korean people called me, "You are traitors." So it is not easy, I know that. But anyway, this novel won the Today's Author Award in 2019. And their commentators said, "Oh, it's simple to like queers," and they say feminists should die. There are also such malicious comments when Our Wish is the Science Voice, which novel deal with the history of Korean science fiction novels through the story of Anna Seo, a nurse in colonial Joseon, and transgender novelist Yoon Kyung-ah, and another novel, Kyoko and Kyojis, which deal with the stories of women and queers whose lives were destroyed by May 18 Gwangju democratization movement onward. At that time, I received malicious comment also in online bookstore reviews every time I published a new book. I think in Korea, the word women, queers are always target of attack. This is a solid hatred that was created during the Japanese colonial period and the Korean War. Actually, same goes for my personal life. Actually, I like people, but I no longer go to gatherings in Seoul. Why is this? When I was master student, a male writer grabbed my list and asked for my phone numbers. That time he was so drunken. But anyway, the male writers was a powerful figures in our literature group. But that time I protested strongly. But ironically, my behavior became a hot topic among the women at my university. I realized that women are in a situation where it is difficult to protect even such basic rights. Anyway, if I hadn't protested so strongly back then, most people would have said that I was causing trouble because I liked the male novelist. Okay, let's go back to the research story. It was the same when I first started this research. I decided to start this research right away after seeing photos of female workers protesting in the 1980s in Seoul. But I immediately ran into difficulty. Even not a single photo remained. Many female workers died or injured in poor working conditions, but no one cared. Instead, everyone talked only about the men who were the heroes of democracy. I know that this hatred was influenced by student movement in Japan and United States, but before we criticize them, Korea government itself should take care of them first. A reader emailed me a while ago. That time she said that she thought my novels whenever she wanted to live as a human being, not a woman. She said she was happy, that she could believe in even a small change. She told me, please not give up and to keep writing novels. Yes, I write novels in the hope that I can witness even a small change. I write novels in the hope that the word feminist will no longer be a target of attack. I write novels in the hope that many social and historical situations will improve so that feminism will no longer be needed, and so that reason my novels will no longer be read in Korea in the future. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Yuten Sawanishi from Japan. I'm a novelist, usually write quirky stories, and usually I don't mention to the politics things in front of the audience, but today the Prime Minister of Japan was just selected, and I hope some progress on the relationship between the Korea and Japan, and I want to say that at first. And I will start my speaking. Okay. And why I write? Why do I write? This is a very personal question, and if you mean why writers write, it's a social question, but I don't want to make the subject too big. Writers are not special people, I think. They are just individuals who have experience of writing. So I think the most honest answer to this question is talk about my own personal experience. I wrote a novel named The Letters of Letters. In this novel, fragments of letters fall from the sky and just keep piling up. They fall and pile up, staining the landscape black, covering the roads, destroying the infrastructure, and destroying houses. All the people can do is to get rid of the letters from their houses. This makes them nervous and their behavior becomes strange. The main character of this novel is an old woman called Mrs. S. This novel is written in the form of letters from Mrs. S. She lives with her retired husband and sends letters to a young woman called Fumie. In Fumie's era, the fragments of letters have not yet fallen. And Mrs. S informs her of the damage caused by the falling fragments. These fragments contain the shapes of letters from all languages, and most of them are incomplete. Nothing more than fragments that make no sense. These immature words torture the lives of the couple and the people around them, both physically and mentally. In the midst of this, Mrs. S picks up the beautiful fragments and uses tweezers to glue them together into letters, which reach Fumie. I wrote this novel in 2012. There were two incidents that triggered it. The first was the rise of or praise for social networking resources, symbolized by the Arab Spring. While it has had a major impact and helped to transform society, but I will never forget the fact that many people have fallen victim to slander and defamation on social networking sites. The second trigger was the big earthquake that struck Japan in 2011. It may be easier to say 3/11 in English-speaking countries. A major earthquake struck eastern Japan, and many people lost their lives in the tsunami. In addition, the nuclear power plants in Fukushima collapsed, and some of its functions were lost. Immediately after the earthquake, as the serious situation was revealed one after another, we Japanese stare at the TV monitor every day and every minute, and struggle with the invisible fear of the collapse of the nuclear power plant. On social networking sites, there was an abundance of statements that were difficult to verify. Since radiation is invisible, we had no choice but to describe its horror and danger in words. The character in letters of letters are metaphors for these things. However, what I was seeking was not to trace reality. That is not the job of a novelist, I think. What I wanted to write about was how, in the midst of this confusion, people can continue to protect their human dignity as human beings. So Mrs. S is able to maintain her sanity until the end by using words and writing letters. By the way, I wrote my debut novel, The Village of Flamingos, in March 2011. The reason for this is that the deadline for submission for the Newcomers Awards was March 31st, 2011. I started work on the novel on the beginning of the year, and even though February I had not ended and I had only completed half of it, I put all my hopes into it in March and threw myself into the work. Then 3/11 happened. I remember facing the manuscripts every day with anxiety, wondering why I was writing now and whether the publisher would still be around in the future if I managed to meet the deadline. After the big earthquake, there were aftershocks, and all kinds of negative possibilities were considered, from the collapse of the nuclear power plants to disappearance of Tokyo, or the shortage of paper due to the reduction in electricity. The only things that kept me sane in the midst of all this was the time I spent working on my story. Writing my own story in the midst of chaos. I believe that this is something that anyone can do, and that it is one of the fundamental meanings of writing, or purpose of writing. And at the same time, I also included another message in the letters of letters. Fumie's son is innocently playing with the fallen letters that injured the couples and have been sent to him. I have talked about what letters mean to me, but I have no idea whether they mean to the same thing to someone else, especially to the next generation. In fact, I think it is important that the next generation has a different answer. Today, I have talked about the reason for writing for me. I hope this will reach somewhere and become a catalyst for someone to think about the reason for writing. And also, please allow me to advertise here. The students in Associate Professor Kenda Heitzman's Japanese translation class are working hard on the translation of Letters of Letters now, and also the poems of the Kei Okamoto. And there will be a reading of the translation on Thursday evening, October 17th. If you are interested, I would love for you to come and listen. But unfortunately, I don't know the event detail yet. And when I wrote this manuscript, and now I know, but I'm not sure. So, and please keep your eyes on the IWP program. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. I would just like to say thank you to the State Department and the International Writing Program, and of course the Iowa City Public Library for having me here today. Why I write? Some write because it's difficult and they like the challenge. There's this sort of like magic in puzzling words together, but answering this question, I think, has been more difficult than anything I've ever written. But on reflecting, I think it's become more evident for me that it's not a question of why I write, but why I should. I remember traveling with my family when I was young, and people would ask where we're from. We'd say Saudi Arabia, and they'd be like, "You mean South Arabia?" I have no idea where that is, by the way. We'd settle on Arabia for our future trips, a generic location and palatable. I've always written. After discovering the Jonas Brothers at 9 years old, my sister and two of our friends formed an all-girls band in which I was the dedicated songwriter. I journaled about loneliness of adolescence and cruelty of other girls making fun of my curls and my Americanized accent. I look forward to my high school English class where we were asked to write essays about Shakespeare and John Steinbeck, but I never saw a career in it. There weren't any strong programs in Saudi at the time, so I settled on interior design, thinking it would be fun to decorate houses for a living, only to find out there was so much math, which is definitely not my forte. I also liked arguing about a lot of things, so I switched over to law, and I was miserable. 2 years later, I finally got the opportunity to travel abroad for my studies, journalism maybe. I was advised against it by a lot of people, telling me the profession was tiresome and dead anyway, but my stubbornness prevailed. So when I landed in Boston and placed my luggage at the Piano Road dorm at Emerson College, I had no doubt I was meant to be there. From my very first class, we were pushed out onto the street and asked to find a story, any story, and bring it back. I felt an adrenaline rush, a world of possibilities, and an enticing word puzzle waiting for me to piece together. When I returned back to Saudi in 2021, it was a different world. Was this really my Saudi? I thought to myself. Women were driving and music festivals were thriving, and there was so much more to do than spend our free time at restaurants and desert excursions. There was so much the world wasn't seeing, and so much that even I couldn't see while I was abroad. The true gem of Saudi and its heart is its rich culture and history. During my residency at Misk Art Institute in Saudi, I created a journalistic piece about the building the residency was held in. Prince Faisal bin Fahad Fine Arts Hall, I've come to find, was one of the first to welcome women to showcase their work alongside men decades ago. I'm currently a staff writer at Arab News, which is Saudi's first English language daily, founded in 1975, and currently the leading English language daily in the Middle East. I co-manage an environment page, and I continue to write about the booming art scene, profiling incredible artists like Manal Doyan, whose influential community and participatory works are showcased at the Venice Biennale this year at the Saudi Pavilion, and Mawadda Muhtasib, the Saudi woman behind the first reversed Arabic calligraphy typeface, and a lot more glamorous stuff like covering the Cannes Film Festival and interviewing Hollywood legends in my own country. So through journalism and the soft power of arts and spotlighting our cultural metamorphosis, I could finally make people see. I don't think writing for me was ever a choice. I write because I have to. All my trials and tribulations lead to home. I love what I do, and I've been able to highlight so many voices, but I suppose never my own publicly. One thing that stuck with me when I was in the US, back in Boston, and even now, is how often I'm told my first name means nothing. A statement I've grown tired of, not because it's offensive to share what something means in your own language, but of its ignorance to ask firstly what it means in mine. 4 letters that are so small, they mean nothing and possibly everything. I write because I want the world to know our names. I will offer you now that my name actually means morning dew in Arabic. I no longer want to be told that my name means nothing in Spanish or Portuguese or languages that are more commonly spoken around the globe, and my history is not nothing. Like my country, which just celebrated its 94th National Day 5 days ago, وعاشت السعودية, I'm told that I'm so young, but this is exactly why I write. It was reported last year that 63% of Saudis are actually under the age of 30 years old, and the youth recognize how important it is to preserve this heritage and legacy passed down to us by our elders. We're the ones who live to tell their story and also to tell our own as we go through this fascinating period of cultural change, more importantly, to document it. This is why during my time here at the International Writing Program's fall residency, I'm working on my first poetry book, pieces that explore my journey with navigating identity, tracing my heritage, my conflict with my own language and place in this ever-changing time and space, and hopefully to never settle again for the generic and palatable. I leave you with this poem I wrote 3 years ago at the Miss Residency, which may help encapsulate my answer to this very complicated question. It's dedicated to my late grandfather, who is an incredible archaeologist. The Promise. You spoke to me in my sleep. Years ago, you dared to dream, held your brush eternity between your fingers. There is work to be done. I felt your pain between the words written by the victors of circumstance. There was no space for you on their arc. Hold on to the night, for the moon is not above, but within me. I mutter, I am sorry. She was not ready for you. The beauty you held is covered in ashes of those next in line, their sons now able to sing because you had once screamed upon deaf ears. I imagine that my grandfather had tread your land, held your sorrows in his hands, and entrusted me to tell the world with just a glance, it is not just a name, but a past. Your last words to me make us eternal. Thank you.
Thank you all. Ikram will be going around with the microphone. Please wait to ask your question until he comes. I see some hands going up. In the meantime, let me tell you about some upcoming events. Join us at Prairie Lights this Sunday at 4 p.m. to hear IWP alum Sandro, currently of the Spanish Creative Writing Program, as well as Putre Hida Litoya from Indonesia and Priya Hein from Mauritius. And we'll be back here next week for our panel In and Out of Translation with Felipe Franco Muniz from Brazil, Zakaria Amataya from Thailand, Yassine Adnan from Morocco, and Narit Kazatlan from Argentina. And Tabish, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you for a lovely panel discussion. You covered almost everything that all of us other writers would also probably offer. So I won't say anything about what you said, which was all extremely fascinating. But there's a question that always strikes me when this question is put to writers. Why do you write? And the question that strikes me, and that's what I would like to ask you to address. Why do we write? That's the question. But the next question is, why do we talk about why we write? What would be your answer to that?
Who wants to take that on? Sabine? Yeah.
Okay. Why do we talk about writing? Well, I mean, we were asked to. But I think there is, I think we are curious people. right? As much as we like putting something together, we like taking it apart as well, to see how that thing has been formed. And I suppose talking about writing is a way of understanding the process, understanding the reasons, understanding the motivation. Perhaps talking about writing is a way of making it more accessible. There is this idea that the muse or inspiration or revelation, so many mystical texts, mythical texts, scriptures. There's this idea that it descended from nowhere, and I think when we talk about writing, we understand that it's a very human act. It's a very human act of connecting with others, and there is a process, there is a thought behind it. That's all I'd like to add.
Anybody else?
So thank you for question. Can I answer? Okay. I think this for everyone avoid the question, and we don't want to speak about why we and what you ask. And I think you are our good friend, and
we told you to ask us easy questions.
Yeah. It's easy question. But I think I like reading the dead authors' books, and why I like the books is I can conversation with the dead person or the author who are away from here, but except for that, we also have our own life, and also we cannot live alone. So sometimes we need a time or share a time with friends or authors, and I think why we talking about this is just we like books. It's all, and I think it's important to spend a time alone to writing and reading, but also we cannot live alone, so we want to talk about and we want to encourage and cheer up with each other, and it's the why we are talking about now, I think. Yeah.
Can I say?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
I just want to say very short. In my case, I think writing is we able to share our loneliness. Yes, because on television and every YouTube, like that content, always they talk about good things, funny things. But writing is different, I think so. So yes, that reason.
I will add on to that as well. I think being also the youngest person currently at this residency, I have far less experience, I guess, in writing literature specifically. And I think talking to my fellow writers and why they write and how they write has been super helpful, and also helping me shape my writing and what I want to do with it. And I think that's really the goal here, is to create this space to share ideas and build further onto the literature scape.
And can I just add on to that? I think talking about writing, as you said, also gives people hope, I'm sure that many of us have had people come up to us and say, you wrote this and it resonated with me. I also want to tell my story, And often when we see a book, a published book, we think, oh, wow, this writer just sat down and wrote it. But being here at this residency, we can see it's not that easy. We all struggle, we all have a process. So I think it is an important act to talk about the writing process as well.
Hi. So my name is Catarina Gomes. I'm a writer. I'm from Portugal. And when Nada was speaking, I realized the first thing I told her was, your name means nothing to and I laughed. And so I feel very bad, because actually I think the importance of this program is to go beyond what we know, our misconceptions, our stereotypes. And I felt bad, and at the same time, it was so interesting to know that nada means morning dew, and thank you very much for that. I think the core of this program is that, because I studied every person before I met them. I created ideas, and now I'm here. And at the same time, I told you, your name means nothing. It meant, I was just, there was a barrier, and I think it's really important that we hear everyone's stories that go beyond what we think we know. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I want to say that I was hesitant to include this because I don't want to offend anyone, and it's not offensive to me to share that, but yeah, I've just heard it so many times.
Maybe Nada, you can tell us what Iowa means in Arabic?
Iowa is like yes,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
Iowa. So yes to Iowa.
Anyone else want to take that on? Add anything to that?
All right, I just have a quick question. Thank you guys for sharing your guys' stories and with us. I have a lot to Google after today, so appreciate it. I just do have a question about what do you hope people take from your writing, from your stories? Or is it kind of one of those such personal things where it's like, I don't care what you guys take, I got what I needed from it?
Who wants to take that on?
I don't expect anything. Just I write, yeah.
Yeah, I think coming in with expectations is probably maybe the worst thing to do. I don't know, but I really just, I'm learning to write first for myself and then secondly for other people at the moment. So this is my current answer in 2024. We'll see if that ever changes.
I think there must be something very wrong with you because I definitely have a lot of expectations. I think I am writing to be heard. I am writing because I want to make a point. I want to create awareness. I want people to know about my part of the world. I suppose I want that sense that my story matters, the story of the people that I'm writing about. It matters, it deserves to be heard. And I think I'm hoping that through writing, not just the things that I'm writing about, but also the way, the craft, the conventions, the traditions, the sensibility of the language. I hope all of that comes across, and I hope that that there's more literature coming out of my part of the world, and that too becomes part of the canon of literature. When I was growing up, we only studied English literature. We had characters, Peter, Jane. We never had characters like Akbar or Hina or Nada, and I'm hoping that by writing about people like me, different parts of the world that I've lived in, this also becomes normalized.
I would like to edit my answer. I was thinking more so poetry. I write poetry for myself, but with my journalism work, absolutely. Like I think there's this mysticism around the Middle East and Saudi Arabia specifically, like I just mentioned in my essay, that people have this idea that Saudi is purely just oppressed. And there is so much more to us than that. And I think that's really the message that I try and do with my journalism work. So I hope that comes across if people read it, but yeah.
Okay, sorry, Han, were you saying something?
No.
We can't hear you. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, hello, my name is Pervin and I'm from India, and my question kind of builds on what all of you just addressed, which is I understand that the sense of identity is so closely linked with what you write, and I feel that as well. So I'm wondering whether you wish to ever free yourselves from this responsibility and reflect as writers, writing as an act of imagination, as an act of intellectual exploration, and free yourself of the burden of change, of cultural exploration, of activism. Is that something that you wish you could talk about? Structure and imagination and metaphor rather than social issues.
What a great question. Sabine, you want to?
Thank you. Thank you, Pravin. That's an excellent question. And I think it's one of those things that, we become representatives of our identities, our countries, whether we like it or not. And I think that burden of representation is very heavy. I think somebody in the US or UK can write about anybody they want. I mean, Kipling wrote about Indians, Forster wrote about Indians, but we, in our part of the world, we don't write stories about Peter and Jane, right? Is it because we're not allowed to? Or is it because, we don't feel that we can or we don't want to? I think it's a very interesting question, right? So often, even when we are writing against the stereotype of our own kind, even that becomes questionable, right? If I am writing about a woman in Pakistan from, an upper class woman, very often editors will tell me, oh, but this doesn't sound like a Pakistani woman, right? So if even those identities are slotted so much or blocked so much, then writing about something which is completely out of your experience, I guess it becomes a question of audience, right? When I feel that if I was to write about a professor in Norway, a male professor in Norway, perhaps I would be asked, what is my credibility or authenticity? But a professor in Norway may be able to write about somebody living in Pakistan. So again, it's that burden of representation, responsibility. Yes, I think all of us would, like to write, and I think, some of us, use magic realism, use science fiction to write about, imaginative worlds and really explore that genre. But I think it is hard to get away from your identity when you're a writer of color or your gender identity. Yeah.
I think we have time for one very quick question.
Perfect.
Yeah, agree.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I have a question for Nada. So I resonate with your piece that you read today, because I feel like it's very interesting how the Arab world is kind of mysticized and also kind of invisible. And I have a question about when you actually moved to the U.S. I'm Lebanese, so I feel like I've thought a lot about, especially since what's going on in Palestine and Lebanon recently. It's kind of made me go back to my identity and think about it more, and it's made me kind of realize how invisible the Arab American identity feels. And I'm just wondering if when you moved to the States, did you kind of notice that your identity kind of being misrepresented or invisible in a few ways compared to your other peers, or even peers of color, where a lot of their identities.
And we have about 30 seconds, so please ask the question.
I think I asked enough.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely. When I got to the U.S., I think I was the only Saudi I knew in my whole university. So it did feel very invisible, and there wasn't really a space. But I managed to find some Arab friends that could make me feel a little bit closer to home. I don't know if we have time for more.
Thank you so much. Wonderful panel.
Thank you.